Product provided by Nintendo.
The release of Link's Awakening for Nintendo Switch has made me realize that the Switch is becoming quite the platform for a Zelda fan. Ironically, almost comparable to the Wii U, which has access to nearly every Zelda. Switch isn't on that level just yet, but it does have a respectable amount. So for today's video, I'm going to rank every Zelda game available to play on Switch from worst to best. Let's talk about it.
Developed by Koei Tecmo, Hyrule Warriors was originally released on Wii U in 2014, then ported to 3DS in 2016, then ported again to Switch in 2018. It's a very particular kind of game given its Musou, or Warriors in the West, status. It's a particularly referential game with the widest range of playable Zelda characters in any other title released to date. It's a grindy game that you can very easily autopilot while doing other things. It's a game you can play together with friends locally,
and it's a game that didn't quite gel with me very well. And I consider myself a reasonably big Zelda fan. I've played pretty much every major Zelda release to date. Admittedly, there's a few blind spots here and there, which we'll get to in a little bit, but the tribute aspect of this game did resonate with me, and I do appreciate it on some level. I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge how boring the gameplay got for me pretty quickly.
That said, this gameplay style has its fans, and for those people, there's a crazy amount of content to consume with the main story mode, a free mode where you can replay story mode missions with any character in the game, an adventure mode where you can complete missions with special objectives on a map that's modeled after the original Legend of Zelda games to unlock more characters, level up weapons, and get heart containers, and another challenge mode with battle challenges. This is easily my least favorite game out of the ones available on Switch currently though, so the specific nuances of each of these modes are sort of lost on me. Based on my time with the game, most of these modes seem to sort of be redundant, but to each their own. This didn't really have any bearing on the placement for the games on this list for me, but in any case, for those of you who are curious, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition scored a 78 on Metacritic.
Something interesting about the playable Zelda games on Switch is that a good amount of them are available to play for free for Nintendo Switch Online subscribers, with all of the NES and SNES games available to play now, and I'd assume we'll have up to at least GameCube in the future.
One of the games that are a part of this group is the next game on my list. Developed by Nintendo EAD in 1987, then ported a bunch to other Nintendo consoles that aren't Switch, and then ported to Nintendo Switch early this year, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is another divisive entry in the franchise with people on both sides of the aisle. Some people love this game, others hate it. I'm personally more on the latter side, and a lot of that is owed to how weird this game is in the context of Zelda games. Sequels on NES were very experimental, with Zelda 2 in particular becoming more RPG-like, and if there's anything that usually falls on my list of cons for Zelda games, it's typically when they get very RPG trope heavy, but we'll get back to that in later entries in this list. In particular, I'm not a huge fan of the random encounters in the overworld that this game sports, which should be of little surprise to current subscribers of this channel. The sword mechanic seems poorly implemented, with it feeling more like a dagger than a sword in my opinion. The lack of maps makes this game even more confusing than Zelda games can tend to be for newcomers in a particular entry, and this game is especially a victim to this since so many of the level layouts are reused across dungeons. A big complaint some people have about this game is its linearity, but honestly, this is the least of my concerns since I feel like the linearity makes this game at least a little bit more palatable.
This is easily the Nintendo developed Zelda game that I'm least likely to want to revisit in the future. The Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link scored a 73 on Metacritic.
Developed once again by Nintendo EAD, released in 1986 for NES, and again ported to a bunch of other Nintendo platforms that aren't Nintendo Switch until it was finally released on Nintendo Switch Online in 2018, the original Legend of Zelda game is where we start to transition into the games where my appreciation for them starts to outweigh outweigh the things I dislike about them. This game, after all, is the Zelda game that established all the stuff I love most about future entries in the series, and it was free from most of the things I dislike the most that became prevalent in the N64 era of Zelda games that maybe we'll revisit if they port them to Switch. I don't know.
But I ain't got time for that on this video. Just know that I like the original Zelda game, and if you're looking for another Zelda game to check out, this should be one on your list to consider, specifically on this part of the list. So check this out before the last games I mentioned, but not before the ones I'm mentioning next, because that's how lists work.
That said, with it being the first of its kind comes some of the antiquated practices that I don't think age very well, namely the lack of direction for what to do next, which I'm of two minds on. If you're in the mood for that sort of thing, it can be fun to explore with nothing but trial and error guiding your experience. On the other hand, it's just as easy for it to become an annoying chore to progress while searching aimlessly for your next objective. Luckily, we live in a post-Google world, and countless guides are at your fingertips, so getting lost shouldn't be a huge issue. Don't let tryhards on either side of the video game guides and walkthrough discussion sway you. Play the game however you see fit. The original Legend of Zelda scored a 84 on Metacritic.
Developed by indie developer Brace Yourself Games, Cadence of Hyrule, similarly to my least favorite game on this list, is an experimental take on the Zelda formula.
Completely unlike those games, this game is incredible, and I wish I could have thought of a fun video idea for it because I would have played it a lot more if I had to play it for the channel. Turning a 2D Zelda game into a rhythm game sounded to me like an idea that had potential due to the Zelda series having pretty solid music to work off of, but also potentially disastrous because, like, what would something like that even play like? Fortunately, it feels good to play. It breaks my brain a little bit when I'm not playing. I've legit played entire Super Smash Bros. Ultimate matches attempting to adhere to the rhythm of the music in that game. I wouldn't say I need more Zelda games similar to this, but it was definitely a fun one-off experience that netted us some dope remixes to listen to. I also wouldn't say this game is for everyone, but anyone that enjoys some good video game music, has enjoyed a rhythm game or two in their day, and needs to scratch a Zelda itch with a fun change to the formula should check this out. The reason I'd rank it above the aforementioned game specifically is because it doesn't suffer from the monotonous gameplay of Hyrule Warriors.
And it's a modern game, so the antiquated design decisions that bog down the other games don't really affect Cadence of Hyrule. For what it's worth, Cadence of Hyrule scored an 86 on Metacritic.
Originally developed by Nintendo EAD and released in 1993 for the Game Boy, then ported to a bunch of other stuff, until now when it was remade from the ground up by the Japanese studio Grezzo that's known for remaking other Zelda games for Nintendo 3DS. Link's Awakening is a game that I went into pretty blind this past weekend, and I enjoyed my time with it quite a bit. The complete subversion of several Zelda tropes, like Zelda herself being completely absent from the game, the random quirky inclusions of other Nintendo properties, the colorful cast of original characters for this game, the introduction of a jump button before Breath of the Wild did it, and as far as the remake in particular goes, it's just great to have a modern take on a Zelda game that I personally haven't experienced up until this point.
Sometimes I struggle to play through retro games depending on the series because I get frustrated by the outdated sensibilities of that game and opt to play something else instead.
Remaking games in this matter tends to minimize the chances of me noping out of a particular classic. Also, it doesn't hurt that it means we get cool new visual takes on older pixel art styled games, even when it is a divisive art style. I personally think this art style looks dope, and I brought this up on the last episode of the stream podcast thing me and Bob Wolf do every Sunday on youtube.com/wolfden at 8 p.m. Eastern time if you were unaware. Someone can have this idea for free. Just give me some of that sweet credit. I want someone to make a pseudo Let's Play series of Link's Awakening with a tilt-shift lens and a clay diorama of the game world. But I digress. This doesn't mean the game is flawless or even free of the antiquated design of old. There are still design choices that I think are questionable at best and tedious at worst, namely the major fetch quest that's about a quarter of the way through the game, or the fact that the D-pad is not only unusable for movement, but it's completely unusable for anything at all, which is a baffling choice.
But overall, yeah, despite that, Link's Awakening is the third best Zelda game on Switch, no contest. And Metacritic must agree because it scored an 88 on that platform.
originally developed by Nintendo EAD for SNES in 1991 and then ported to everything in the world until it finally came to Nintendo Switch Online earlier this month,
Link to the Past was my favorite Zelda game by a mile.
This because it retained the open explorative nature of the original Zelda game while also becoming less cryptic at the same time. This balance is nearly a perfect one for a game like this. I don't need my handheld, but like, give me a map at least, you know what I mean? Apart from that, Link to the Past is the pioneer of a lot of the things that have become franchise norms in subsequent entries, including Link's Awakening. Some of these first include the inclusion of a Dark World and items like the hook shot in the Master Sword. Ocarina of Time often gets the credit for pioneering the Zelda formula that so many Zelda fans have come to love, but Link to the Past was the true blueprint to that, if you ask me. It took the series into a more narratively driven direction without making it too predictable or, yes, handholdy. This game is so good that the announcement of Link's Awakening's remake coming to Switch immediately prompted fans to request a similar treatment on Nintendo Switch for this game. But as far as visuals go, this game doesn't really need it since it isn't too far from modern takes on games of this era. Just look at Cadence of Hyrule for proof of that.
I swear, I finished the order of this list before I even thought to include Metacritic scores, but the critics seem to agree. Link to the Past scored a 95 on Metacritic.
I mentioned Link to the Past was once my favorite Zelda game. The only game that could solidly dethrone it from that title in my mind is also the top game on this list.
Breath of the Wild was developed by Nintendo EPD and was released for Wii U and Nintendo Switch simultaneously in 2017. This game is not only widely accepted as the best Zelda game of all time, many would consider it their favorite game of all time, period.
That's not an opinion I would say is universal. Many don't like the major innovations that were introduced to this series, or the commitment to shirking conventions like traditional dungeons, the combat systems, story beats, and more, but I think these changes, in addition to a return to form in the form of its open world exploration in tandem with the insane amount of discoveries you can make within its world, its in-game systems like the chemistry and physics engines, and many more things that I feel like talking about here is doing anyone who hasn't played this game a disservice by not allowing them to discover it all in a playthrough of their own.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has an industry-leading 97 on Metacritic, and is the one Zelda game I would recommend to literally anyone without any qualifiers. If you haven't played it yet, change that immediately. And that's my ranking for the Zelda games that are currently available to play on Nintendo Switch. What do you think? Is your ranking any different? Have you checked out Link's Awakening on Switch yet? Where do you think the Breath of the Wild sequel will end up falling on this list? Let me know that and more in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and click that like button and share it with a friend who you also think might enjoy it. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell for new videos like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. New podcast every Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Different channel, linked in the card right in front of your face. Okay, that's it for me. See you next week.